The movie opens with a scientist named Control chatting with what appears to be a virtual man who tells him the end is near. The scene then shifts to an interview with an astrophysicist, Michael Swafford, who has been invited to discuss his new book, where he explains the most violent event in the known history of the universe. Michael explains it to be the Gamma Ray Burst, or GRB, believing it is the last thing mankind will see before we're blown into our non-existence. He further explains that once the high-mass star collapses, gravity crushes its core into the black hole that immediately begins to devour the dying star around it. But the energy is too much for the black hole to consume at once, and some of the energy is blasted out into the universe in the form of narrow beams of intense radiation, and he says that the Earth lies directly in the path of these radiation beams. The scene then shifts to Control trying to find a subject for his project to prevent humanity from being Control-Alt-Deleted, which leads him to scan the psychological profile of the entire population of the Earth, and they shortlist 943 candidates. A ground team is deployed to collect their DNA samples, and only one of them passes the analysis. His name is Joe Stedman. We see Joe sitting in his living room, engulfed in sorrow, as he looks at the old tapes of his pregnant wife and his daughter Zoe. Unbeknownst to him, Control is watching him doing his daily routine and going about his day. His medical records show that Joe is undergoing treatment for depression, self-harm, and recurring anger control issues, the perfect candidate for someone who'll save the world. Joe works in a company as a security guard and has two estranged daughters. Unable to forgive his father, who left her and her younger sister Rhea after her mother's death, Zoe, now 25, is a nursing student and lives alone in her apartment. In contrast to her, Rhea is a substance abuser like her father. She has lost perspective and is often found being abused by her boyfriend. Control keeps an eye on the girls, and it is revealed that Zoe is dating Michael, the same astrophysicist who was interviewed recently. It has been 1 year since Joe has been clean, and he meets his psychiatrist to update her that he got a front desk job at a government-funded facility. Even though he finds it surprising that he never applied for a job, they contacted him and he accepted without thinking much as it pays well. He soon gets his 1 year chip and thanks his higher power that helped him cope with this difficult situation. He laments leaving his daughters after his wife passed away from cancer, but keeps his hopes up that one day he will reconcile with his daughters. He remembers when he was a deckhand on a commercial fishing boat and would come home after being at sea for months. His wife and daughters would greet him with open arms, and now he lives in solitude, devoid of the loving family he once had. Joe tries to rekindle his relationship with Zoe and decides to give her a gift. He meets her on the street outside her college while she's strolling with Michael and tells her that he has been sober, but Zoe keeps her distance and acts dismissive when Joe tries to give her the gift. So Joe forces it into her bag, and Michael becomes defensive as he's making Zoe uncomfortable. This makes Joe lose his composure, and he takes Michael by the neck and punches him in the face. Zoe somehow pulls Joe away and yells at him for acting like a time bomb, ready to explode any minute. She storms off with Michael, leaving Joe upset. Once back home, Zoe tries calling Rhea, but when she doesn't pick up, Zoe feels something is wrong and suspects Rhea is back to her old habits. Michael, however, is optimistic and comforts Zoe. Meanwhile, Joe drives around the town in a storm till he parks and sits in his car, thinking for a long time. He drinks, hoping to drown his woes, and almost falls asleep when, suddenly, somebody puts a plastic cover over his head. It seems that someone else was in his car all along, looking for the perfect opportunity, and now Joe sits struggling to get the bag off his head, but soon loses consciousness. The man then drags Joe outside, and he's taken to Control's Scientific Research Center, where they modify his senses by planting a device in his optic nerve and leave him out in an alley where he wakes up after suddenly hearing a voice. His eye hurts as he tries to comprehend what is going on and stumbles upon a case with his video from the day he was awarded the 1-year sober chip playing, and when he opens it, he finds a gun and a magazine. Control addresses Joe directly and tells him that they have placed a device in his eye which allows them to see what he sees, but he also warns that Joe will see what they want him to see and plays videos of his daughters. Control taunts him for the kind of influence Joe has had on his daughters. One becomes a drug addict while the other suffers from extreme stress as a consequence of their broken family. Joe pleads with him to stop, as every time Control presses a key, Joe gets a brain freeze. Just then, a woman enters the alley, looking genuinely worried for Joe, and asks if he's fine. Joe asks her to call the police, but to his shock, Control asks him to take the gun out of the casing and shoot the woman, or he'll shoot Rhea. Joe doesn't have a choice and pulls the trigger, and the gun just clicks, likely because he left the magazine in the gun case. The woman, however, has a taser, which she uses on Joe to knock him out. Before losing consciousness, he hears Control's voice, who tells him he is Joe's higher power. Joe finds himself in a car's trunk and contacts the authorities. However, Control warns him if he tries it again, he'll lose his daughters. Joe agrees to everything Control says and is finally allowed to come out. Control guides him to a certain location and asks him to look in the bag containing a tab. The tab shows a video of Charles Margray, the president of the company Joe works for. He is authorized to go inside and make Charles bring out a laptop he has secured in the safe and authorize it. Joe has to put a gun on Charles' head to get him to do that, and once Charles has authorized it, Control asks Joe to put his thumb on the scanner, which surprisingly matches, and Control finally has confirmation that he chose the right person. However, when Control asks Joe to shoot Charles, Joe refuses to do it, and Charles takes advantage of the distraction. He hits Joe with a fire poker, which disrupts the visuals, but just a few seconds later, Control's assistant, Sabby, is able to restore the visuals. Joe removes his mask and discloses that he is sent by a man controlling him. After Charles looks into Joe's eyes, confirming the presence of a device, he addresses Control and says he had to shut down his project because it is too dangerous. However, Control remains unfazed, and just as Charles takes a few steps back, ready to shoot Joe, an armed drone shoots Charles down. Control orders Joe to take the clippers and cut Charles' thumb as they would need it. Joe returns for his shift at the research facility, and Control asks him to wear his mask before he releases toxic gas throughout the facility, killing everybody inside. In the name of saving humanity, of course. After the gas has dissipated, Joe removes his mask, and Control asks him to reach the main facility. He almost gets knocked out by one of the guards who is still conscious, making him lose his audio for several seconds. But after knocking him out, stealing the keys to the main facility, and using Charles's severed thumb, he gets authorization. He's concerned about his daughters, but Control assures him that he has one more task to fulfill and his daughters will live. A glass chamber ahead shows a massive machine, and Joe steps in to find the lever he needs to pull. As soon as he steps inside, the machine's door closes and Control activates the machine, sending a high amount of electromagnetic waves towards Joe, making him suffer. He pleads with Control to stop, but Control asks him not to resist something that was already destined, referring to the fact that Joe is the only one who can withstand the effects of the machine. Inside the machine, the waves affect Joe at a subatomic level and change his DNA altogether, sending a massive burst of waves through the machine that radiates outwards and destroys everything it touches. The facility blows up, probably killing more people for the sake of saving humanity, of course, and the police and news reporters quickly reach the scene. Upon seeing the news on the television, Zoe cries, realizing she lost her father, while Michael tries to comfort her. Meanwhile, Joe wakes up and finds himself in a zipper bag. He gets out and realizes he's in his house. He gets distressed by what Control is subjecting him to, which leads him to get frustrated, and suddenly his hands start glowing. He gets afraid of what's happening to him and punches the mirror, breaking the wall into pieces and sending a wave that shatters the windows. Control tells him that he has harnessed all his fears and negative emotions into a source of infinite power, which can only mean that his therapist was terrible at her job. Now he can use his powers to save his family from what is coming. But first, he needs to pass tests designed by Control to unlock his greatest potential. So Control asks Joe to reach the next location, to which Joe complies, but when he goes outside, he can't find his car. Control provokes Joe, to which Joe responds by punching the ground because that's what angry people do. This again sends a powerful electromagnetic wave that starts a motorbike parked nearby. The science is way past the window at this point. Control wants Joe to confront a man named Nico Sola, who is Rhea's boyfriend and the one who got her hooked on substances. Joe reaches an underground dingy place where the girls are kept as showgirls, tied by chains, and he finds Nico clicking pictures of one of the girls. But when he confronts Nico, the man knocks Joe out and ties him to one of his prop boards. Nico comes to know Joe is Rhea's dad, and to anger him, he plays a video in which Nico is taking advantage of his daughter. This enrages Joe to the extent that he releases an unstable energy threshold that almost takes a humanoid shape before returning to a massive orb shape in the middle of the city. It soon disappears, and Control witnesses it all. The machine signals for an increase in stress levels required. Joe frees himself from the restraints but gets stabbed by Nico. Surprisingly, it doesn't harm him, and Nico tries shooting him, but the bullets get absorbed in him. Terrified for his life, Nico tries to run away in his car, but Joe catches up with him, and Control triggers Joe's memory, making Joe emit a powerful electromagnetic wave that kills Nico when it sends his car flying. The beam alerts the police and they soon arrive. Control tells Joe he has failed the test and needs to turn himself in so he can dwell upon what went wrong. The police soon arrest him even as he pleads that he is dangerous. He is questioned rigorously by the police for being present at both the blast scenes. Control asks Joe to tell the police about a bomb at the shipyard, which will kill 20,000 people if it goes off. The officer immediately dispatches a unit to check out the veracity of the information, while the other officer gets electrocuted when he tries to pressure Joe into answering his questions. Joe also gets thrown out of the window from the impact, and he takes the police car to reach the shipyard to save the people. Control provides Joe with a hint about the bomb being in a shipping crate. With the police in hot pursuit, Joe rushes to the dock, but he suddenly starts transforming and soon becomes an energy orb. The orb makes its way and appears as a Kamehameha wave that slices through the center of town and homes and creates more lens flares than a Transformer movie. Joe reaches the shipyard and using his newfound powers, he lifts all the crates in the air, far from the surface, when the bomb goes off. The impact sends the metal flying and a piece of it hits a passing plane, destroying its tail. Even in superhero mode, he still makes terrible decisions in life. Joe, who has taken a humanoid shape, prevents the plane from crashing using electromagnetic waves and at the same time prevents a metro train from derailing because a part of the tracks got destroyed by the wing of the airplane. The news quickly spreads and Zoe is shocked to see her dad alive. But just then, a group of men barge into her house and kidnap her and Michael. Joe reaches Zoe's house and finds it empty. He sees a laptop that plays a live video of Zoe and Michael being held captive by Control's men. Control challenges Joe to save his daughter, and Joe touches the screen, gaining access to Control's computer. He tells Control that he is no longer under his control and appears in Control's research facility in a matter of seconds. He forms a protective shield around Zoe and Michael and starts destroying the facility and killing Control's men while Control stays put in his seat like the stubborn old man he is. Joe hugs his daughter and asks her to trust him, happy that her dad is safe and alive, and she agrees, ready to give him another chance to compensate for all those years he was not around. As Joe gets engulfed in a bright light, Michael looks mesmerized and says, "Deliver us," as if praying. It is revealed that he was the virtual man who talked to Control and helped him restart his project as he knew the Earth's end was near. Suddenly, Control asks Michael to shoot Zoe and to save humanity. Michael shoots Zoe in the chest without a second thought, but gets killed by Joe. After Zoe dies in his arms, Joe sees Control's men John Wick Rhea in the head, killing her instantly. Losing her daughter simultaneously, Joe loses control, and massive electromagnetic waves emit from him, making neural connections and giving Joe a supernatural form. The Earth becomes a part of him, and Control gets absorbed in one of the networks. He declares he has given Joe omnipotence, and through Joe, he has created a god. At least he isn't a flash drive. Joe loses his sense of perception, and as the energy from him spreads, it obliterates Control and envelops the entire Earth. In outer space, we see energy waves coming towards the Earth. Joe faces the beam, and as he does, he remembers the promise he made to his wife before she died to keep his family together. Joe lets go of the anger, absorbs the beam into himself, and revives his daughters, who find themselves on the beach they used to visit in their childhood. As they hug each other, Joe, now completely transformed into energy, signals 143 to his daughters, which means "I love you," reminding them that even though he may not be present with them physically, he is always around them. And that's a wrap for this movie recap. Thanks for watching.